Derek here today. A lot of them aren't even here today. But just because Derek's doing the lesson and everyone wants to hear Derek. So we're excited to hear from Derek this morning. Also, one other announcement that didn't get made earlier is the Gartners just wanted to thank everybody for cards and flowers that came in over the last week with the birth of the little baby.
Who's controlling
My wife. So hit the up button.
Yes, sir.
You're gonna hit the up button.
Are you using
Let me see what you're up to. Unless you want the tablet. How's that sound? All right, excellent. Let me just get my act together here real quick. I'm a little more comfortable down here than up there behind the pulpit. Donnie shot me a quick email last night. He wanted me to tell you to say, he wanted to say hello to everyone. I guess it'd be about 5 o'clock in Paris this time p.m., so he's hoping to be at the hotel to watch the service online. So hopefully you made it. But what I'm going to be doing is sharing a little story with you guys as it goes into my sermon for today. And back in 2008, we had the financial crisis, or the start of it. And some of us were affected by that, especially me being in construction. But I was 26 years old at the time, and I was working in Bloomfield on a project. And the contractor that I was working for didn't have any more work, so I knew a layoff was inevitable. And one of the guys mentioned about Las Vegas and how they always have work. And I had a rough 8 months of my life, and I'm like, you know what, I need a change. I need to get out of Connecticut. I'm sure a few of you can relate to that. And so I called up the Union Hall in Vegas and said, hey, listen, how much work do you guys got? They're like, we got 5 years of work on the books. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. Ended up only being 9 months, but that's okay. So I said, I'll see you shortly. So I got laid off. I booked a flight to Vegas. I flew out there. I signed the book, went sightseeing, jumped out of an airplane. Had to do something crazy, right? It's Vegas. Okay? Got an apartment, flew back home, packed up my truck, said goodbye to everyone, and I was gone. Okay? So it took me about 5 days to get to Vegas. I made some stops along the way. And once I got there, I settled in, got my apartment ready, and 3 weeks later I was out to work at the M Resort, which was a big casino. And my job was to be in the pool area, which was still dirt, and I was going to be running conduit and wiring to get the pools up and running, the planters and the cabanas. So, but while I was in Vegas, I had some time to kill. I decided to join an organization called Toastmasters. Now, Toastmasters is an organization that helps you with your presentation and your public speaking skills. And they got clubs all over the United States. So once you become a member, you are given this manual that has tips and strategies on public speaking. And it also has various challenges and tasks for you to complete. And the very first task is to give a presentation about yourself in front of the club members. So those that know me know that I like to be original, I like to be unique, come up with something different, something memorable. I didn't want to go with the traditional, hello, my name is Derek James Nadeau. I was born on March 26, 1982. My parents are Gordon and Irene Nadeau. I was born at Bristol Hospital and I was raised in Bristol. I can already see a few of you dozing off on me. Okay. It would have been too boring. So as I was mulling it over my head, thinking about this, I noticed, being a typical Italian, got my hands moving, okay? And my wife likes to make fun at me. She goes, I know when you're having a conversation in your head because your hands start moving. It gets really good when my lips start moving but no words are coming out and the hands are going. Okay? But as I look at my hands, I'm like, well, my hands define me as a man because of the things I've done with them. And the title that I thought of was, You Can Tell a Lot About a Man by Looking at His Hands. I'm like, it's a long title. Sounds good. I like it. So I rolled with it. So in my presentation to the Toastmasters, I explained about my background in trades and a little bit about myself using my hands. Now, if you would all just humor me for a second, I want you all just to look at your hands for a moment. Okay? I want you to observe them for a second. Take a look at them. What do you see? How do they feel? Okay, what do they look like? Now, some of you may notice that your hands are youthful in appearance with no imperfections. Especially Madison, right? Perfect hands, like a model. Now, some of you may notice the aging of time and scars on your hands. Others, the years of toil and hard work that have affected your hands to the point of pain, carpal tunnel, arthritis, cracking and drying skin. But when I look at my hands, they tell a story, just like your hands do. You know, I can count, I actually stopped counting. I got about 50 scars from my elbow to the top of my finger on both hands, or both arms. And I got so many scars. I got scars that are circular, scars that are straight lines, even scars that form Chinese symbols, okay? I think this one says pork fried rice. It's faded over time a little bit. But these scars remind me of stories in my life and also lessons that I've learned from them. For example, when I was about 12, 13 years old, I would mow lawns. And I had my own lawnmower, and I decided to take the blade off and sharpen it. So as I was putting the blade back on and tightening it, it kicked back and got me right there on the index finger. Okay? That hurt. Left a nice little scar. The lesson I learned was if you're ever going to tighten anything really sharp, make sure you cover it. Very important. But another lesson I learned was when I was 16 years old, I worked over at Frankie's in Bristol. And my job was behind the deep fryer. And every time you put food in the deep fryer and dropped it in the oil, that oil would splash right back at you. Okay? So for the first few months, I would feel every little bit of splash of oil. But after a few months after that, I built up such a tolerance for the pain, I didn't even feel it anymore. But it left a lot of nice, pretty scars on my hands. But at the time, I had a goal. And that goal was to save up for a car. And it's amazing what the mind and body can endure despite the pain and aggravation to achieve a goal. And the lesson I learned was that when the goal is worth achieving, our bodies can be pushed beyond our limits. Not only do I remember the stories from the scars that I see on my hand, but I also see the stories as I look at my hands. For example, guys, how many of you remember reaching over and trying to hold that special young lady's hand for the very first time? Now, ladies, how many of you remember how damp that hand was? But you found them so cute and adorable that you didn't mind it. Okay? Also, how about that time when you said your marriage vows to that special someone as they put that ring on your finger? You know, I married my beautiful wife on September 16th, 2012. And she's the one that put the PowerPoint together. So she's been wonderful, especially putting up with me. Also, just recently Don experienced this, but how many of you remember holding your newborn baby for the very first time? You know? And how big they were, or how much space they fit in your hand. Now, when Xavier was about a month old, I got to hold him for the very first time. And he has this, when he was a baby, he had this really big head and this tiny little body. And we would jokingly say that he was an orange on a toothpick. And the only way you can get this kid to sleep was you had to wrap him up like a burrito, okay? And his head would fit on the palm of my hand and his feet would just dangle below, as you can see in the picture, you know? Or how many of you remember holding the hands of a loved one, not knowing if they were going to make it, or simply holding their hand to comfort them in their time of need? Or how many of you have reached out your hand to a complete stranger just to try to save their life? Think of all the things that you've done with your hands. It's amazing the memories our hands can remind us of. The things that we have done that we are proud of, and the things that we have done that we are ashamed of. I wonder, what did Jesus' hands look like? We all know by Scripture that he was the son of a carpenter. You know, was his hands just as scarred as ours? Were they strong? Were they rough? Were they calloused? Did they hurt from all the years of working with tools? I can imagine his hands taking a beating in that hot Middle Eastern sun, and even getting slivers in his hand while working with his father Joseph and his younger brothers. But even though the Bible doesn't tell us what his hands look like, the Scriptures do tell us what he did with those hands. And in the Gospel accounts, the writers use words such as hands, finger, touch to describe what Jesus did. Jesus would perform miracles with his hands. He would heal the sick, the demon-possessed, and even raise the dead. In Matthew alone, it gives some great examples of what Jesus did with his hands. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 18, it reads, "A ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, 'My daughter just died. And if you lay your hand on her, she will live.' Shortly after that, in verse 29, it reads that Jesus went, grabbed her by the hand, and she rose. Shortly after that, there were two blind men that cried out, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on us.' And he did. He took his finger and touched their eyes, and their eyes were opened." Another great example of Jesus' love and compassion is in Matthew chapter 8, verse 2, and it reads, "And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, if you will, you can make me clean.' And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, 'I will, be clean.' And immediately his leprosy was cleansed." Here you have a man with a flesh-eating disease who probably has not felt the touch of another human being for years. Jesus was willing to touch this person who is shunned by his fellow man to be cured by his Creator. He embraced people with those hands. He touched the lives of those who had nowhere to go, the social outcast, and people with no hope. The gospel accounts show us that it didn't matter to Jesus whether you're rich or poor, popular or unpopular, pretty or undesirable. He would still touch them. Jesus showed us that we should not cast them aside. He set the example for us by getting down and washing the disciples' feet. He showed us how to be a servant, and in order to be a servant, we must be willing to put our hands to work. then when they nailed his hands to the cross, he was willing to go through all of that because of his love for us. He had a goal to save mankind from death, and he endured that pain, suffering, and humiliation to achieve it. Jesus' hands tell a story about his love for his creation. Those scars were so powerful. In John chapter 20, verse 19 through 29, Jesus showed the holes in his hand and the hole in his side to his disciples, and they were excited. Thomas wasn't there at the time, so when the disciples went back to Thomas and said, "We have seen the Lord," Thomas scoffing, saying, "Nah, I'm not going to believe it unless I put my fingers in his hand and in his side." 8 days later, Jesus said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Church, what did Thomas say? Say it with me. "My Lord, my God." Jesus said to them, "Have you believed because you have seen? Blessed are those that have not seen, but yet believe." Sarah once told me a story about a soldier that had died in combat. Now, the military would not show the wife his remains, but all she wanted to do was to see her husband's hands. If she was able to see her husband's hands, she would know for sure if it was him or not. I wonder, when we go to heaven and Jesus stretches out his hand to us, will we see those holes in his hand, truly realizing the sacrifice that he made for mankind as he wraps his arms around us and says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." His hand is stretched out, waiting for you. Now the question is, are you willing to take it? We have all been tempted by what we see in this world, but you are loved despite what you have done with your hands. We all ask for mercy, and he's asked us to show love through actions. I implore you to be baptized, because in Peter it reads, "The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise," in reference to judgment, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. In Isaiah it reads, "Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, nor his ear dull that it cannot hear." And if you would, please stand for the closing song. Thank you. You just want to jump up there?
All right, well, let's sing Trust and Obey. I like that one. Number 915 in your songbooks.